All right, Doug, we are here to talk about the election this year today. You successfully called Trump's victory in 2016. Not one of the very few people, I think, successfully made that prediction, and you did publicly. But this time you have a different view. So I'd love to hear your take on the 2020 elections.
Yes, that's quite correct, actually. I not only stated that view, anybody can state a view, talk is cheap, but I put money on it. I bet Marin Katusa 100 ounces of silver. So I was very pleased to win that. Anyway, yeah, I'm not optimistic about Trump's chances this year. And let me start out by saying that I'm not a fan of Trump for a number of reasons. But it's all relative. And relative to the Democrats, he's just vastly, vastly better. And it's not that he's better, it's just that they're so perfectly horrible. So the fact that I'm going to give you 6 reasons why I think he's going to lose, I wish I didn't think this way. I wish I could be optimistic about his chances. But we live in a world that's falling apart, and pessimism is generally warranted in most areas, I'm afraid, including this election. So I'll give you the 6 reasons, just so we can discuss them. First of all, is this ridiculous virus that we have to deal with. Secondly, or not the virus itself, it's the hysteria surrounding the virus. Very important distinction to make. Secondly, it's the economy. Third is the demographics of the country. Fourth is the fact that the country is suffering a moral collapse of the old order. 5 is the fact that the deep state, which is a real thing, is solidly against Trump. And then 6 is actually none of those things matter, because it's all going to come down to who cheats the best, because this is such an important election. So you want to start with the situation of the virus, or what?
You know, the one that jumped out to me first, I just didn't understand what you meant by it, was the moral collapse. So I'd like to just start there, and then we can go back to the virus.
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, there was, in 1985, there was a Russian, Soviet at the time, named Bezmenov that taped an interview. Did you happen to have seen that interview?
I think I did see it recently, actually. You talked about the way that you would undermine a society going through its education system, first of all, right?
Yeah, exactly. He was a defector in 1970, which is ancient history now, of course. It may be irrelevant to a lot of the people listening, but it's actually not. So anyway, he was a KGB operative, and he defected in 1970, and he taped this interview in 1985. And in it, everybody, you can probably call it up easily on YouTube, just by looking up Bezmenov. It's spelled with
Yeah, I'll look it up and I'll link to it in the description of this video.
Okay, great. But basically he said there are 4 stages if you want to undermine a country, and the first is to demoralize it. And how do you demoralize a country? You basically destroy a belief in everything that it stands for, its institutions, its history, its beliefs. You basically make these things invalid. And this has been going on in the US. Well, it's a question of where we want to start, but it really started this process in earnest back in the 60s with the last cultural revolution that we had. We had a cultural revolution in the late 60s and the early 70s, and it got underway in earnest then. But now as Bezmenov pointed out, in 1985, that's been completed. Americans don't believe in any of the things that made America great, which is another subject that we could talk about, whether that's true or not. I think it is. But so, all right.
I think you're right. You know, so undermine all the values, undermine your beliefs in the institutions and everything else. So that's his first step for doing it.
Exactly, demoralization. And then the second thing is destabilization. And I think we've seen that, especially starting with the crisis of 2008, which I would deem the start of the Greater Depression, actually, where, you know, you can't rely on your bank account or your retirement pension or your job or anything. So you're not only demoralized, but the economic fabric, the political fabric also of the country is destabilized. People talk about, well, Watergate started it. Well, politicians have always been corrupt and lied and cheated and basically treated the voters as if they were marks, which they are. But it went on long before then. But Watergate kind of brought this whole corruption issue in the government to the fore. Okay, so it's destabilized. Now, what happens after now? The country's demoralized and it's destabilized. Now, all you need is a crisis so that these things can crystallize and then fall apart.
Coronavirus is certainly that.
Yeah, exactly. We've got that crisis right now. And as we talked about the last time, this is a major turning point in US history where a catalyst, like the last major one was the assassination of JFK, and a catalyst crystallizes all these things which were just kind of amorphously floating around, and they recoalesce into a new structure. And that's exactly what's happening now. But because the country's been demoralized and destabilized, they're going to reaccrete. They're going to come back together in a very different form. And I don't think it's a form that I'm not going to like it at all, because I value things like individual liberty, personal freedom, capitalism, things like that.
Western civilization.
Say what?
Western civilization.
Yeah, Western civilization. That's a bigger problem that we have to deal with. Actually, this is like a subtext to the collapse of Western civilization itself. It's very funny. You could probably do a comedy skit on this, talking about the collapse of America, and say, hey, don't worry about it. You got bigger things to worry about. The collapse of Western civilization itself, and it's true.
Oh man. So what's the fourth step in his mind in overthrowing your government or undermining?
The fourth step is renormalization, where after the crisis, when things recoalesce in their new form, then everybody looks at it, bunch of sheep, as the new normal. Hey, that's the way things are. This is the way the world is. So they just go on. And of course, the people, the ruling classes, some will be the same, but it's just as with the French Revolution. Some of the old orders stuck around, but there were a whole new group of people after Louis XIV had his head cut off. And it's with the Russian Revolution. Yeah, well, that was even more radical. But a new ruling class, a new ethos is going to dominate everything. So there you have it.
So let's go back to number one then. You said, which is the coronavirus, and is the number one reason or the first reason why Trump would not win. Why you think he's just going to get all the blame for it?
Well, yeah, because we live in a highly politicized society, and unfortunately, people expect that the government's in charge of everything, and when things go wrong, it's the government's fault. Just as when the president, when the economy or anything is good, the president takes credit for it.
Full credit.
But whether or not he had anything to do with it, usually it's a long wave, so he usually doesn't. But in the short run, but yeah. But I came up with 4 reasons why this virus is bad for Trump. And one is that the hysteria, and I don't refer to the virus itself, I always refer to it as the virus hysteria, because sure, this virus kills people the way the flu kills people. Okay, that's fine. It's deadly if you're of a certain age, like an average age of about 80. That's the average age of the person's killed by it. But it's the hysteria that's much more important. And worse than the hysteria, it's the new laws and governmental actions that have been put in place.
Government edicts, really. They're not even laws. They're really government edicts, right? They're not even laws.
Yeah, you're quite correct. And all the sheeple really just accept these edicts because they're so used to the government running things. Anyway, but the first point I was going to make is that the hysteria is limiting the size and the number of Trump's rallies. And I think those rallies are important to keep the enthusiasm of his base up so they can get together with each other and exchange stories and build on each other's enthusiasm, this type of thing. So it's hurt him from that point of view. It's not going to hurt Biden at all. I mean, he can't even get a couple people to come to a coffee shop when he shows up. So that's the first way it's going to hurt it.
Okay.
The second way is that more people are staying at home and watching television than ever before. But unless their dials are glued to Fox, the media, all of them, uniformly hate and despise Trump. And most of the voters aren't hard right or hard left. Most of them are wishy-washy in the middle. They don't really know. And they'll tend to believe these authoritative talking heads that they hear. So you stay at home all the time watching television. You're going to hear, and you're going to tend to vote against them. So that's how the virus hurts them from that point of view, keeping people at home, the hysteria. Second thing. Third thing is, I'm a little less certain of this one, but older people do have the heaviest voter turnout. And most of the casualties of the virus are elderly. I don't know if the average person even knows that, quite frankly. But
I don't think they do.
I'm not sure they do. It's not emphasized.
I think if they knew the median age of death was 81, it would change people's point of view. I mean, the risk of death is extremely high from all causes for people who are 81, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
you get to be 81, hey, you're going to die.
You're going to die.
Right. It's just whether it's the virus or something else. So anyway, it's going to tend to scare. I mean, the reasonably informed older people are going to recognize that, yeah, it is more of a risk for me. And they're going to want to stay home too. But since older people tend to be culturally conservative, and the reason why Trump is as popular as he is because he's culturally conservative. It's going to hurt him from that point of view, I think.
That makes sense.
Third reason. And the fourth reason is that today's world is very, very highly politicized, where the government's supposed to be in charge of everything. But despite the fact that there are thousands of viruses and they've been around with us for thousands of years, this one's blamed on the current government. I mean, it's basically a big nothing, but they blame it on the government and the current government, which is Trump, and Bubis Americanus is likely to vote accordingly. because he's heard that, well, Trump mismanaged the virus. That's why everything is so screwed up in the country. And I'm talking about the majority of voters, the ones in the middle that don't know much, don't think about much, whatever. So the virus is going to hurt Trump. That's number one. It's not going to hurt Biden. What do you think? The
tendency of Americans also is that we feel like that someone must be responsible for something. Like if something bad happens, it's almost like you have to be able to go, you have to pin it on a single individual. It's just a tendency Americans seem to have, where they can't just look at, well, it's a very complex system, that causes a whole bunch of different things to go on. Plus, by the way, your governor and mayor had a lot more to do with how it affected your life personally than the president did. That's like, they don't understand that, of course.
Yeah, Americans like to blame somebody for something. That's why God made lawyers. That's why this country's full of lawyers. You can blame and then sue somebody, but you can't sue.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
of course not. So the economy was the second major category. Was that right?
Yes, exactly. And once again, since the government or the president or the powers that be are thought to be able to run the economy, and unfortunately they do to a good measure, a bad economy is why, well, Clinton said it best. He said, it's the economy, stupid. And if people feel like there's cause for optimism and they're going to make more money and, they can put an addition on the house or get a bigger apartment, they're happy and they like the status quo. But if things are grim, like they are now, where all the restaurants are closed, you can't go to your gym, you have to wear a mask like a dog all the time, they're going to want to change. So
what about the fact the stock market is so high? Who knows? We have 49 days before the election and it could totally collapse, it seems, at any moment. But it seems like you would get, the fact that people's 401ks or pensions look good, probably keeps them from being too grim about it, I would think.
Yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, the average guy doesn't have a lot of stocks. I mean, he knows he's got some in his pension plan, but actually, the fact the stock market is doing so well may be a negative, because the differentiation between the rich and the 1% and everybody else has gotten much, much greater as they pump trillions of dollars into the economy. It's all gone into the stock market this time. And that's created envy. So, yeah, you're right. The stock market being up usually helps. But on the other hand, it's created a real atmosphere of envy. Because the average guy, he might get lucky a little bit. He sees his 401k or whatever it is going up, but he knows these other guys are becoming really, really rich. So it's actually not a good thing. And if it crashes, it's going to be worse. So,
and it seems like it's like a hanging on by its fingernails. It seems like it could just fall apart at any moment.
Yeah, because it's solely dependent upon the Fed. And they say, well, unemployment isn't so bad. I think that's completely incorrect, because in February, before this hysteria started, there were about, as I recall the numbers, 3.2 million people that were collecting unemployment of some type. But now there are about 30 million people that are collecting unemployment, state and the federal unemployment too. Well, some of it's been ended, but 30 million people. Now, so how many working age people are there in the country? About 160 million, okay? So the way I read it, we're looking at unemployment of about 18%. That's 30 million people that are displaced. And maybe they like making more, or at least until recently, much more actually, being unemployed than they did being employed. But it's a ticking bomb, I think.
Right, and I think the official numbers on unemployment are like just a little over 10%. But I don't know. The way they calculate these things always is mystifying. It's almost like they don't count employees that are technically furloughed, maybe, so that they're laid off, but they're not actually permanently laid off, so they don't count them on the unemployment rolls. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense, though. The numbers you're talking about are vastly higher than the 10% that their official numbers are.
Well, I think they're more reasonable because you look at the number of working age people and you look at the number of people that are officially getting government benefits, and you come up with, I think, more reasonable numbers. And there's something else that I question here. I'm not collecting these benefits, so I actually don't know. But I understand that the federal government benefits are taxable. Am I right?
They did come back and revise that's the $600 bonus or whatever that the IRS did come back and say that would be taxable.
Taxable. And how about, that's the $600 weekly bonus that people were collecting until recently, right? Okay, but they don't extract those taxes when the money's paid, so those taxes are going to be owed at some point in 2021, am I right?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And I mean, I think if most Americans, if they actually had to, as small business owners do, write a check to pay their taxes rather than have it sort of hidden and taken away from their paycheck automatically, there'd be a new Tea Party. There'd be a revolt. If people actually realized, if they had to write the check, it would change things. And if there's a bunch of people, 30 or 40 million people who have to write a check next year, that's going to cause trouble. I mean, I can't even imagine it.
Well, that could be a good kind of trouble because withholding tax on the income tax, where it's taken out of your paycheck before you see the paycheck, that only started during World War II as a temporary measure, as all these things start out, and it's still around. So if people are collecting $600 a week plus state, I don't know, and they get a big bill from the IRS, that could be a very good thing next year. They might understand that they actually have to pay for this stuff.
I agree. I mean, I think if Americans had to write a check for their taxes, that would change everything. If people actually, just like if you had to write a check for your health care, it would change things. If you had to actually pay for it in a way that you could see what it cost, because it's, most people who, I guess if you're, not most people, but certainly I know a lot of people, it is for me, I pay more for taxes than I do for all of my other expenses put together. There's nothing, taxes are the single largest expense by far. Nothing's close.
Yes, they are. But, I'm shocked at how unsophisticated economically the average American is, because I remember when I had a full hour by myself on the Donahue show. It's on YouTube, incidentally.
You should link to that also. That's a great, everyone should watch it.
It was the day before the national elections between Reagan and, who was that other one? Was it Carter that was running against Reagan then? I guess. Yep. And so I was feeling my oats, and I was explaining to the audience the expense of government and so forth. And some guy in the audience, middle-aged guy, wearing a coat and tie, stood up and said, well, why do we have to pay for all these things? Why doesn't the government pay for it? And the audience clapped. They loved it. They thought that was like a cosmic breakthrough. So
exactly.
So it's actually pretty hopeless trying to talk economics to the average American. So,
well, I mean, and MMT just sort of makes that more real, makes it more seem like the money comes from nowhere, like it just can be conjured out of thin air.
And it turns out they're right, it can. So
for a while.
Anyway, with all these people unemployed and unhappy, and their standard of living going down, and the standard of living is going down because when you're producing less stuff, there's less stuff to have. And there's less stuff being produced right now. So the standard of living is going down subtly in ways around the edges. It's going to make people unhappy. They'll blame it on Trump. And so the economy is not helping them.
Okay. So the third major category for you was what? A major item?
Got to look at my list here. Because I'm trying to
I messed it up by I messed it up by
Uh,
skipping around and starting with number 5.
right, of course. All right, this is kind of a big long-term thing. It's the demographics of the country. Um, there are going to be, in my opinion, gigantic political and economic and social upsets over the next few years. Certainly accelerating around the time of the election. But the last election was close enough. But you've got to remember that in the 4 years that have passed, 4 more cohorts of kids have gone through high school, and many are going through college. Almost everybody seems to go through college these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a rite of passage now. It used to be an unusual thing to go to college, and now everybody goes to college. Anyway, these 4 new cohorts have been indoctrinated by the school system in leftist politics and what passes for leftist economics. So there's going to be more voting for leftist politicians this time, just because of the demographics, the more people. I mean, people like AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, is the wave of the future. I mean, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. I mean, everybody's supposed to support these things. Major corporations certainly do.
They lined up. They lined up right away to do it.
Exactly. And nobody but a few libertarians and conservatives are countering the purposefully destructive ideas that are being put out there. But demographically, it's the young people all tend to be leftists. So, frankly, when the Constitution, and we can talk about the Constitution at some point too, which is, it's a good thing, but it has problems. Well, one of the good things about it was that it said that you could only vote if you were over 21 and a property owner. You have to be a property owner over 21. And then it was further filtered by the Electoral College, which you elected the elector. And the elector then could vote which way he wanted. So the whole system has changed. And now anybody who's a welfare recipient who's only 18 can vote. And of course, the Democrats are talking about reducing it to 16.
Right.
So, and the Electoral College is basically toothless at this point. So it's all changed.
Well, I definitely want to talk about the Constitution and talk about that issue of, because it's the idea that you had to be a landowner to vote is something that is just shocking to people's imagination today. Like they just think it's just, like talk about, white privilege and patriarchy and all that stuff. It just falls right into that in their mind. But I think it's important to understand the thinking behind it, and we should definitely talk about that in another one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But right, so demographics are changing, and also, we have had virtually, I wouldn't say unfettered immigration, but we've had broad immigration. This has been one of the larger expansions of immigration into the United States that we've had since our founding. I mean, I think that there's been like 2 other large ones that I recall, and they all kind of led to some sort of strife. Before the Civil War, there was a lot, and there was also, leading up to, so like there was a pretty much unfettered immigration then too, which led to a lot of kind of an oversupply of labor, that caused a lot of internal strife, from what I understand. So
Yeah, but those were previous waves of immigration were Europeans, and that's very, very different from the immigration that we're getting now. So let me say something that if anybody anybody outside a certain philosophical view listen, oh, racist. Well, the fact is, there really are racial differences between people. They look different, okay? And they have different languages, and they have different cultures, and they have different religions. And the people that are coming in now, like the 200,000 Somalis that came in, the ones that are elected, who's that Muslim woman from Minneapolis? She's one of the Gang of Four.
Her name was totally slipping my tongue.
The
From
one that
Minneapolis,
wears the hijab.
Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, exactly, right. So these people all vote Democrats, but there's a big difference other than the things I just pointed out: race, religion, language, all these things, culture. These people that are immigrating now are not coming to the US for opportunity. They know that it's sweet over here, that you can live off the fat of the land. They're coming here for the benefits, which is a very different driving force. And of course, my question is, who imported these 200,000 Somalis? These people are dirt poor. They can't afford to buy a plane ticket and then set themselves up in Minneapolis, where they all are, which is where Ilhan Omar is from. I'd like to know who is in back of that, who paid for their plane tickets. I mean, if you want to immigrate from Africa to the US, you've got to hire a lawyer, basically, to jump through all the hoops. How do these 200,000 people do that? This is a mystery that nobody talks about, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and I think that's, it's almost like we're just, Americans were so distracted and, and we were focused on being good-hearted that we just kind of felt like we could help everyone in the world. And so, lots of different nonprofit. I mean, I know like Catholic charities are have been very involved in like refugee resettlement and bringing, and encouraging more of this type of immigration. So I don't know, there's lots of organizations, and of course the government is involved with it too. Why? I don't know. It could just, blind people trying to do what they think is good for others, trying to help other people, assuming that there's plenty to go around, or maybe something more nefarious.
What it is stupidity. And we have to define the word stupidity, incidentally. It's an inability to predict the consequences of actions, okay? The indirect and delayed consequences of actions, but sometimes even the immediate and direct, as opposed to the indirect and delayed consequences. And turning a country where the people share similarities into what amounts to a multicultural empire, domestic empire, is a formula for disaster. We can talk about that.
Especially at the same time, if you're undermining if you're basically denouncing the values that did bring disparate peoples together. If you denounce them essentially as invalid, the idea that the belief in individual freedom, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Like if you basically just discount all of our core values and say that they're awful, that they are actually seeds of evil, that they are, from the from its very moment of inception. So then the fifth one was
the deep state. There really is such a thing as the deep state. It's a term that was coined in Turkey during the Ottoman Empire. And the deep state is the people that actually run the country. That you don't usually think of that. It's not the president and his cabinet, although they're part of the deep state. It's top academics, it's top generals, top corporate guys that run the big NGOs, big fund managers, top senators, the heads of the Praetorian agencies, FBI, DEA, NSA. There are about 15 of them that would fall into that class. So these are the guys that it's not a conspiracy per se. They don't all get together and stroke white cats, but they have the same views and the same values and the same objectives. Their nests are feathered the same way, basically living off the state. So the deep state hates and despises Trump and supports Biden and the Democratic Party. And they're really powerful because they control, I mean, things like Facebook and Amazon and Google. These are all very anti-Trump companies. And they, look, they're even taking out ads. You remember that Gillette ad that came out a couple of years ago where it had a bunch of white guys barbecuing, and the ad basically said, get woke and turn into a social justice warrior and, you know, put away you remember that ad, right? We should
exactly.
Like people haven't seen it.
Toxic masculinity was attacking.
Toxic masculinity, right, exactly. So this is part of the moral collapse too. But the thing is that the deep state is, and all these corporations are doing everything that they can to make sure Trump doesn't get elected. And like I said, this isn't going to affect dyed-in-the-wool Trumpers. They're going to vote for Trump regardless. But I'm talking about the people in the middle, the 30 or 40% of the country that are swing voters. It has a big effect on them. So, and the deep state wasn't really out during the last election. Why? Because they thought there's nothing to worry about. Hillary's going to walk over this. I mean, we don't have to do anything. But this time, they're worried, and they're going to come out in force for Hillary. So it's going to be serious. But,
yeah, and I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, they seem to just even if you look at all of the efforts to get Trump once he was elected, you know, there seemed like there was so much effort on the part of, you know, certainly the news media, which you've already talked about that, but also, you know, the FBI and the Department of Justice, like just even keeping certain facts that would have, you know, shown that there was nothing there, keeping those, you know, under wraps so no one could know. So it would keep going on for so long. So it seems like, it does seem as though that those people would be actively working against him again. I mean, just as hard to imagine they wouldn't, whatever that means, active working against him. Maybe it's just collusion with the media to try and, you know, have more releases of bad news that just like disparage Trump, like saying that he, you know, was saying terrible things about the troops, for instance, like that kind of stuff that just gets released from these anonymous sources. Like those are deep staters, right? Wouldn't that be what you call deep state?
Yeah, completely. And one of the things that is problematical about Trump is that he seems to have shown really bad judgment with the people he surrounds himself with. Yeah. He should have rooted out all these people to start with, but there's all kinds of people, from his personal lawyer to who's that general, Mad Dog, whoever.
Yeah, Mattis, yep.
Yeah, they all come out and say terrible things about him. Whether they're true or not, I actually don't know. I don't know the man. But it's bad judgment to have these people in the room with you to start with. I don't know what's going on in his head. But
yeah.
Anyway, these 5 things that we've talked about so far are very important, but they're not nearly as important as what's really going to determine the election. And that's cheating. And I think that's going to be really major this time. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and look, the Democrats are much better at cheating than the Republicans. And they've done a lot more of it over time. And both of the parties are terminally corrupt, but the Democrats are much better at cheating. And I mentioned I grew up in Chicago, and it was a joke even then that the ballot boxes were stuffed. And books like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals wasn't written for Republicans that believe in Boy Scout virtues. So cheating is going to be very big. I mean, and they're talking about mail-in votes, but it impresses me as a pretty stupid idea, because you can register dead people as voters. You can register your dog as a voter. For all I know, this time around, you might be able to get away with registering 50 million Nigerian princes as voters. And if the fraud's ever even discovered, it's not going to be discovered for months afterwards. And it's going to mean there's going to be a contested election and lawsuits and this is the stuff of a civil war that we're talking about.
I think you're right about this one for sure, because I think that the way that I imagine it going is that even if Trump wins, on election day, it looks like he won. The stage has been set to make it extremely contested. Like Facebook announced that they won't allow candidates to claim victory on election day, prematurely. That Facebook is going to determine if a candidate is prematurely claiming victory, which is a weird thing for a company like that to take that position, you would think, but this goes to the deep state item you talked about a moment ago. And then in addition to that, I heard something like 100 million mail-in ballots are being sent to people. So, the biggest difference with these mail-in ballots is that, they basically are sending them out to everyone who is on the voter rolls already. And so, you don't have to prove that you're one of those people, and they're just mailing them out to whatever they have on record. And it's well known that the voter rolls they're not the best database in the world. Like, they're not the most accurate that's out there. And so lots of, people who have already died are going to get these almost certainly, and lots of maybe cats and dogs and the Nigerian princes too. But when that happens, actually I saw someone I saw the other day who he received a ballot in California that was like a libertarian party, which he was registered as. And then he also got another ballot in his name that was an unaffiliated. So he got two ballots in his name based upon his party registration. So, there's just even those kinds of errors that can happen, I think, can make it possible for multiple votes to take place. So, and it takes forever, much longer for them to determine, what the results of those mail-in votes are. So, you just expect the lawyers to be deployed and it to be, deeply contested across the board for months. And maybe, with these nightmare scenarios I've heard is that Nancy Pelosi ends up being president.
Yeah, well, as they say, vote early and vote often. So it's going to be facilitated by this. And of course, anybody that can show a state driver's license can register to vote. And so there's supposedly 20 million illegal aliens in the country. Most of them have driver's licenses. Driver's licenses are easy to get. They can all vote. I mean, people seem to worry about the Russians influencing the last election, which impresses me as ridiculous. If some Russian teenagers are hacking in their computers, or some Russians bought some ads on Facebook or something like that, this is trivial. This is nothing. But
a couple $1,000 worth of ads too.
Yeah, but if you got 20 million illegal aliens in the country and they can all vote, I'd say that's, if you're worried about foreign influence, that's a much more serious type of foreign influence.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, so you think Trump won't win one way or another, probably ultimately, if nothing else, because of of cheating.
Well, there's some late breaking news, you might say, that might alter all of this. Cheating is what's going to determine it, but still, these riots all over the country, BLM and ANTIFA, and the Democrats that sponsor them, really, support them if they don't sponsor them, they've overplayed their hand. If there's anything that the average American wants, he doesn't know about ideology, he doesn't know about economics, he doesn't care. Why is he? But he does want stability, and he does want peace in the streets. And he knows that these people are all kind of Democrat linked. So I think that the Democrats may have overplayed their hand with these riots.
It's possible. I think it really, there was momentum. The momentum was where it felt like it was just getting worse and worse, where they were escalating and going on everywhere. And it felt like the pressure was building. And it does seem like that pressure has been relieved a little bit, at least in the moment. That's the way it feels here in the U.S. It feels like the pressure has eased a little bit on this growing unrest. It seems like, but if it even stays at this level, or if it flares up between now and the election, that fear that I mean, I think every parent probably felt worried about, like, do I want, what do I want I don't want to walk downtown in Denver with my kids. Like, not that there would really be anywhere to go anyway, because most things are closed. But there's that fear is the ultimate motivator, I think, for the swing voter. For people who aren't decided one way or another, if they're afraid, I think they're more likely to come out and vote. And I think you're right. I think that the Democrats have overplayed their hand here. So we'll see. We'll see. So next time, let's talk about wins if they win, if the Democrats win, or vice versa if Trump wins.
Yeah, it'll be the same in some ways, but very, very different in other ways. So
we'll say that for tomorrow.
We didn't even talk when it comes to fraud. I mean, a lot of these voting machines are electronic in nature and capable of being hacked. And if it can be done, I expect it will be done this time too. That's another factor, so, for what it's worth.
This is going to be an election that seems like it's going to be decided by lawyers. Yeah,
the people that everybody loves. It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be chaotic, but it's just the overture to what's actually going to be happening through 2021 and through most of the decade, actually. So
great. Well, let's talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe ultimately we'll get to some ideas about what someone might do to survive the situation.
Yeah, right. Problematical, but there are things that can be done. You can't just roll over on your back and wet yourself like a whipped dog. So sure, we'll talk about that too.
All right, great. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, Matt.